Welcome to Lifting Your Spirit, a monthly broadcast in which we interview people about their spiritual lives and how they support others in lifting their spirits. I'm Reverend Grossman, Interfaith Minister, Director of Spiritual Services for Constellation Hospice, which is in Newburyport, and I also offer spiritual counseling virtually on a donation basis.
And I'm Ted Jones, a meditation instructor at North Shore Insight Meditation Center. I'm also a workshop leader exploring the intersection of Buddhist and Christian meditation traditions.
Our show is based on the following principles. 1, everyone is spiritual. Sometimes we're not conscious and active regarding our spirituality, sometimes not. But even when not, we still have a spirit.
There are many ways to lift your spirit, including not only through religious practices, but also through nature, art, human relationships, and service to others.
Each person's spiritual path is unique and may change in small or large ways over time.
It's important to respect your spiritual journey, trusting that one step leads to another, and to respect other people's unique spiritual journey, regardless of how different it may be from your own. We're not here to convince you of the benefits of any particular approach, but rather just to offer some food for thought.
And today we're so pleased to have as our guest Reverend Rebecca Bryan, Minister of First Religious Society, Unitarian Universalist Church of Newburyport. She has been a part of our Newburyport community for close to 5 years after raising her family in West Hartford, Connecticut, and spending time at the UU Congregational Church in Brookline, Mass. Reverend Rebecca is a lifelong seeker who in recent years has begun to celebrate what she has found to be true and meaningful. Spirituality and faith are the bedrock of her life.
Reverend Rebecca, it's truly a pleasure to have you here today.
It's a joy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And thanks for doing the show. This is exciting.
And we wanted to start just by getting a sense of your own spiritual journey, starting from the very beginning, kind of right up to today. I'm particularly interested in the kind of unexpected twists and turns that such a journey may take, and so I'm particularly curious about that, but I'll turn it over to you to fill in those blanks.
Oh my goodness. From the very beginning, huh?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, I guess I would say to start, I've come to believe that people we're sort of born into this world with lenses or orientations. And for me, that is definitely a lens of spirituality. It is just how I came. I came into this world. I think we all try to make meaning. We all try to understand. We all try to do good, to have effect and find our place. And for some people, that is a different lens, right? Be it whatever. I mean, they're endless, as many as there are people. But so I guess I just say that to start, that from the very, very beginning, I thought about the world, I experienced the world, I considered the world, I viewed the world through a lens of spirituality. And I say not religious because though I was raised Christian, it was the kind of Christianity that was go to church on Easter and Christmas. And that was about it. That and be known that that's what you are. You're a Christian, a Protestant, right? So I also was raised in a fairly rural part of Pennsylvania, where diversity of religion was sort of Catholicism and Protestant. That was about it. So I grew up in with a fairly tunneled experience of religion. So for me, it really is spirituality, and I guess a couple of key things I can say about who I am today, and then maybe I'll let you ask more questions. I mean, I could talk easily this whole time. My spiritual journey has been one of, oh my gosh, deeper and deeper and returning and returning. That's what I would say. Kind of like the labyrinth. It's just, today I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister. I had a call to that ministry when I was 25 and resisted that call for almost 20 years and spent those years in between raising my children, working in the nonprofit sector, being very involved in church as a lay leader in Hartford and West Hartford, Connecticut. But it wasn't until I was 43 that I finally said yes. And it was because I had a spiritual experience, which will, I think, help to illustrate how I would define my spirituality today, which is the second thing I would want to share. So I had this call, this experience of a call to ministry, waited almost 20 years or 18 years. And I was sitting there and I was actually wrapping a gift. I was wrapping a Christmas gift in December. And some people watching might know this story if they're in my congregation, but I knew I had this epiphany of like, I'm going to die at some point. And it was fine, completely fine. Death is for me all part of life. But what wasn't going to be okay was if I had never tried or said yes to that call. That would have been the ultimate disappointment for me. So I didn't know what was going to happen when I said yes. I just did, finally. So I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister, which has been the joy of my becoming, next to being a mother, I would say. And I love our faith, and I love so much about it. But one of our tenets is that it's a very pluralistic faith with great diversity of people's experiences and how they would define their own theology. And we have atheists, Buddhists, we have pretty much probably everything that you would imagine in that way. And that's one of the things I love the most about Unitarian Universalism. But we also have a strong tenet that each person has the right and the freedom and the responsibility to follow their path. So sometimes people say, well, what do you believe? Nothing. And it couldn't be further from the truth. We believe there are many paths to truth. And it's incumbent upon each person as much of a responsibility. Like you said, all of us are spiritual, right? But to follow that path, whatever that may be. And so for me personally, it's been quite a journey. A big part of my spirituality was reconciling the culture I grew up in with my own experiences of how I knew God. And so today I would say my theology is one of Christian mysticism. As a Unitarian Universalist minister, deeply engaged in Buddhist practices and informed a lot by shamanism and pantheism. So, but it was critical to come to a place where I knew who I was, which even though it keeps evolving. So there's a lot more I can say,
Yeah,
but I don't know.
more.
Tell me if
Well,
that prompted.
As someone who has taught inside meditation and practiced that Buddhist form for over 40 years, I'm interested in kind of your exposure and your practices that you've brought into your own path along the way. You spoke yesterday, didn't
Yes,
you?
I
Yes,
did.
I was sorry to miss that,
That's
but
okay.
I heard it was happening, and so I'm curious about your connection with Thich Nhat Hanh and other Buddhist teachers and practices along the road.
Sure. Oh, yes, absolutely. I'd love to answer that. And you had said that some of your work is around the intersectionality between Christian practices and Buddhist practices, and particularly Christian mysticism, I would imagine.
Yes. Well, I think you may know that my uncle was Thomas Keating, who
Bless you.
a huge part of
Yes.
his life was around working in that
Yes.
area around interspiritual
Yes.
dialogue, and that it's something that I've tried in a small way to continue after his death.
And for people who don't know, say a little about who Thomas Keating is.
Sure. Thomas Keating was a monk, a Trappist monk and priest for, I guess, over 70 years. And he popularized a form of Christian meditation called centering prayer, which then, spawned a whole organization called Contemplative Outreach, and it's an international network of people practicing that form of meditation. He also was very involved with interspiritual dialogue. He was friendly with a lot of well-known teachers, including the Dalai Lama. He had a conference that he ran in Snowmass, Colorado, where he's living at the monastery out there, that went on for almost 30 years, where this group of spiritual leaders would convene under the radar. Thomas used to say that he couldn't stand going to these sort of interreligious conferences, and that stuff that really meant anything were the conversations that occurred during the breaks.
Right.
So his idea was to have a whole conference. It was just
The breaks.
that breaks, so that people would be really talking about
Yes.
how they practiced and sharing that, and that it was, from everything I've heard, just a very rich forum.
And that's what I'm excited about this show, is that month by month we'll have to get those conversations with our guests, and for people to hear that and start their own conversations.
Yes, that's right. Then we'll just have a bunch of breaks, right? We'll all get together and have a big old break. Talk about
Going
what's
back
real.
to, you were
Talk
asking
about what's real.
Reverend
Yes.
Rebecca's
Yes.
Yes.
involvement in
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Buddhist
Yes.
meditative practices.
Yeah. So, well, it's long and deep. I would say I was just sitting here sort of pulling into mind and heart some of my most central teachers in my own spiritual journey, many of whom have accompanied me for decades. And today, and probably for the last about a decade, I've practiced centering prayer. But about 20 years before that, it was meditation. And so Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron were the two people that I would say, and Thomas Merton, all of those were in my sort of coming of age in my early 20s of beginning to really understand who I was and my own spiritual path and practices. But they sort of taught me how to live in alignment with who I was in the world, right? Because they're so practical, whether it is the practice of mindfulness, whether it's Thich Nhat Hanh and his practices about how we eat, how we wash our dishes, how we step, how we cook, the importance of Sangha or community. But his teachings were and are core to who I am. And certainly, of course, Thomas Merton. I mean, all of these, it took me a long time to recognize the through lines between them all, which was truly about direct experience, which is how I explain mysticism, that it's not about the dogma or the beliefs or the head, or that it's about that direct experience with the holy, with the best of who we are, with connection to love, compassion, So, again, Pema Chodron and Thich Nhat Hanh Thai were really those initial teachers for me. I would say that, and I tried to follow that path exclusively, right? I really tried to say, well, this must be who I am. I must be a Buddhist. Perhaps I should take vows and that. And so much of how I live and my values align with those things. And yet it was Thich Nhat Hanh or Thai who taught and said, you must be at peace with your ancestral religion, whatever the religion was in which you were born or have ancestral roots. Above all, be at peace with that. And it really resonated for me that it was important. I couldn't just cut off who I had been as a child and for generations before that, and that I had to come to a place of peace with Christianity. And I often like to even say, I didn't choose Christianity, certainly didn't choose Jesus. it sort of more chose me. And there came a point where I said, okay, I can accept that, you know. So luckily, Thich Nhat Hanh also had great respect for interreligiosity. He really wrote a lot of books, you know, around Buddhism and Christianity and the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the Buddha and their consistent teachings and paths. So that's what I would say. That's what I would say. They taught me how to, Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron both, you know, how to live in right relationship with myself and other people, how to accept what is, so that then we can get to where we might do things differently or to change what we can. But ultimately, first it's being with what is. And I love Father, when I turned to centering prayer, it was, of course, Father Keating. I never met him. And Cynthia Bourget, who taught with him, Richard Rohr, those are some of my core teachers as well. Thomas Merton. So, yeah.
You mentioned in going through your history of your spiritual journey at 25 having a calling.
Yes.
Could you say more about what the experience was? What do you mean by a calling?
Sure. It was one of those mystical breakthroughs, if you will, or experiences of, and when I say like Jesus found me or it sort of chose me, you know, it was literally, I was in a deep meditation. I was again, this was the time when I was really grounding myself in practices of meditation, and I was in a deep meditation. And it was literally a message, if you will, or a truth from the teacher of Jesus, you know, that this is what you're to do. And first of all, I thought I was crazy. If you really want to know the truth, I mean, this was not stuff I grew up with. This is not what happens, right? So for the longest time, I thought, shh, don't say anything of that. And then I, you know, thought, well, I do good work in other ways. I, you know, do this, that, and the other thing. I'm in the nonprofit world, but it was just that where literally I was in a deep meditation, came into contact with that truth of sort of being told, this is what you should do. This is what I'm asking you to do. And I finally said yes.
And you were saying a little bit about the resistance to the call.
Yes.
Can you say anything more about how that played out?
So, well, first of all, it was very inconvenient how it happened. It would have been much more logical to me, I've referenced kind of the culture I was raised in. So my father is an atheist. You know, all kind of Ivy League people, it's all academics, it's all intellectual, right? And my mother was not that interested in religion, so she was a Christian on Easter and Christmas. And again, they're beautiful people, but it made it complicated to have my own experiences. And I hope people give themselves permission to follow your path, because in many ways I think it does choose us, right? So the way it happened that I had this call, it was inconvenient to how I thought information was normally sort of. So if a professor, if a professor had said that, or a teacher, or a parent, or I read it in a book, right, and someone said, this is what, take this little skills test, and now you should be a minister because that would have been much easier to accept. But the fact that it came from an inner place of connection to the divine or source, or, you know, we could do Jung's subconscious, you know, collective unconscious, whatever terminology we want to use, that it came from there made it a much more difficult thing to accept. And then when I finally had accepted it, it was incredibly inconvenient in my life. I mean, it meant going to seminary, taking, you know, investing a lot of time and years and money and things that, changing my whole family's sort of structure in terms of where we lived and who I was. You know, my husband didn't marry a minister. My kids weren't PK, preacher kids. And yet they couldn't have been more supportive. But it was extreme risk. I mean, I literally had to jump off the cliff and say, okay, I'll follow it. It's not going away. It's been a long time, and I'm so glad I did. Yeah.
Was it prior to that, when you were growing up, you talked about kind of having that spiritual lens right
Yes.
from the beginning.
Yeah.
Was there a sort of unfulfilled yearning at all, just that your parents weren't religious and that you weren't getting that exposure in a
Oh, yes. I mean, I wanted to go to church every week. I mean, it was a Methodist church, and, the red carpet lead. I mean, it still makes me like, so I found it in nature. I experienced the divine and the holy and God and inspiration and all those experiences of connection. It's really for me about connection, but connection to our highest self, compassion, insight, love, courage, clarity, right? Most of that as a child came from being outside in nature.
So you found that. Because Thomas Keating used to sneak out of the house early, go to Mass before going to school.
I would have if I could have gotten there. Yes, that's right.
And that I'm getting the sense that that's not that uncommon an experience for some people. I'm reading a book that was written by a close friend of his named Tenzin Piradashi, who was the Buddhist chaplain at MIT and very close to the Dalai Lama. And it was the same thing where the parents were just not supportive of the, and so he was sneaking away. He actually ran away from home, and
wow.
And so that's happening in India, and
Yes.
Thomas is right in Manhattan. And
Yes.
you're in Pennsylvania.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Oh, sure. I dreamed of being a nun. I did anything religious. I didn't have all the terminology or understanding I did today, right? So I would. Yeah, I ended up being able to experience it in nature, but absolutely, if I could have walked to a church, I would. Any church, it didn't matter. A synagogue, it didn't matter. Just give me that experience. So.
And counterbalancing that, I don't know if that's quite the right word. There's people, I'm hoping, who will be listening, who religion isn't the attraction for them.
Right.
It's not necessarily their path.
Right.
How, in your ministry, do you encourage, support people beyond or outside of religion to be spiritually alive?
Well, I think that's a really great question, and in all honesty, I love what you said at the beginning, that we're all spiritual, right? And just like we all have bodies and we all have minds. I mean, these are all true, right? So I often say that a lot of my theology is and. It's about the paradoxes and the multiple truths that all exist. So for me, it really isn't about religion unless it is for a person, right? For those for whom that is very important or effective or called, that's beautiful. I think, though, that we could ask ourselves, what is it that's in religion, regardless, that I would encourage for all people, right? And part of that is just about being true to who you are. If you come alive, if you access your passion, your compassion, your clarity, your energy, not necessarily even physical, it's an internal well, right? Whatever that is that helps you connect to that, do that, right? Painting, or it doesn't matter. So I think another thing, however, that religion does, of many things, but one is community. Yeah. And community is, I believe, essential. And I haven't referenced much, and this isn't the place to go into it, but I did come from a very abusive background. So I had a very difficult childhood in many ways with lots of trauma. And I was petrified of people. I didn't like people. I wanted nothing to do with people. And it was actually Thich Nhat Hanh who helped me know I didn't have a choice, that I had to find community. And my people, I had to find my people, right? So again, it doesn't have to be religion, if that's really, but what I would take from religion for folks who are finding their spirituality in other ways, who are your people? Where's your community? The people that you can turn to, the people who help you be your best self, right? The people who challenge you, right? And also, I believe that religion creates inherently set aside spaces and time in our life that we devote to spiritual practice, right? So whether it is a Saturday or a Sunday or a Monday night Sangha, but there's a space and a time and a place with others. So those are just at the top of my head some of the things. Those are the things that matter, I think.
Well, I really appreciate that answer, because there's ways that we find joy in life, whether
Yes.
it be nature or art or
Yes.
reading or
Absolutely.
movies.
Yes.
But to have someone or a few people to relate around those things really brings it more alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
So again, I thank you for being here so we could do that.
My pleasure.
And Ted and I, we take walks, and that's kind of what happens, right?
Yeah, I would
Yes.
say.
Very
Well,
much.
look, right? This, my guess
And
is
here we are.
this came from something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And the question or the topic of lifting your spirit, I love that. I don't know if I might just offer a few thoughts about that.
Please.
Great.
So, a couple of things come to my mind about it. I actually think that one thing is for us to come truly to understand that sometimes, and I'm now in no way, this is one of those sort of paradoxes or simultaneous truths, right? I do believe in lifting the spirit, and the irony that sometimes that happens by accepting the most painful and by not saying, like, I have to feel better, I have to make this better, I have to, lift my spirit, as in anything that's sort of dark is not good. And I, of course, don't mean that with skin color, but, difficult, emotionally difficult, or the times in our life where we're feeling lost or grieving or confused, that I think part of lifting our spirit that perhaps gets a little less air or sort of talked about is how do we find and understand that those times and places are necessary too. So when I say lifting the spirit, it isn't only always about feeling good, right? It's also about accepting what is, seeing the gifts and the growth that it's inherent in whatever space we're in our life. And I do think that we are wired. This is also sort of both in terms of, our brains, and Buddhism gets into this, but Buddha's brain, I don't know if you've read that book, we're wired for the negative as humans. We're wired to be, nervous, concerned, focused on what isn't right, out of just survival. And so I do think that it's also about creating new habits of developing tolerance for joy, developing tolerance for satisfaction, tolerance for gratitude. So all of those practices are so important. And I've come to really understand that it's not about their quantity at all, but about the quality. It's the affect, the feeling, the embodiment of it. It's not, writing 35 things you're grateful for, but it's all up here. When we feel feel it, the gratitude of this, like that lifts. I feel like that's the upward spiral, right? That we can, and then we'll come back, and then we can accept that, and then we can choose again, So
In ways that you suggest or support people in having that?
in having that. Sure. Again, I think that it can vary a lot with people, right, what that is. But I will say that one thing that is essential in my own experience with my own self and others is some kind of service, something, right? Mm-hmm. We're not here just for ourselves. Yeah. So whether you're watering a plant, there's studies about even in nursing homes, if a person has a plant to take care of, how much longer they'll live. And so service, sure, it can be big things, and it can also be, smiling at your neighbor, really listening when a person wants to talk, letting go for a moment of the agenda and focusing with who the person is, but something that is, and some things that are getting us out of ourselves regularly, as well as maintaining that connection to ourselves. So it's a whole lot of play, interplay. But I think that's a big one. So, and connection. We're not meant to live cut off, not from ourselves, not from the natural world, not from each other. Following what brings us that passion or energy or joy, humor, laughing, when I was speaking yesterday, we saw the movie, Thich Nhat Hanh's movie, not the most recent one that just came out, but the Walk With Me. And there was a showing of him in an airport, And there was a little stuffed animal that you wound up, and it would roll over laughing, like in a, whatever, Hudson News or whatever that, right?
Yeah, right.
And he sat there and the smile, and he just kept doing it. And then I started laughing, and it's healing, right? Just to have some laughter. The world can be pretty heavy. And to be able to also find and touch into the goodness and the fun and the, break all the rules once in a while, every day too.
I think some of what important thing I'm taking away from what you're saying is how opportunities can present themselves in so many different ways, and the expression random acts of kindness came to
yes.
mind as you were speaking.
Yes.
And that it's just every interaction, whether it's the person who's checking you out in the grocery store or the guy who's in the AAA truck who's coming to change your tire,
That's
just
right.
the opportunity to actually make in this moment, personal connection that may be brief, but may be very important. I mean,
Yes.
there are people in my life who, one in particular, I probably spent talking with for 45 minutes, never saw them again, and yet it was one of the great teachers of
Wow.
my whole life.
Wow. That's a miraculous story. Do they know it?
I really don't know. I really don't know. It was actually at a training program about death and dying, and there was a dyad situation where you could either be role-playing the person who was dying or role-playing the person who was being the hospice worker, for instance, chaplain. And I chose to be that person, the helper.
Yes.
The workshop ended and I was distraught because I realized that I hadn't dealt with my own issues around death, and that this one woman just saw how distraught I was, and we just started talking, and I said, I told her what happened, and she said, well, why don't we do it now? Be that person who's dying now. And I went through that and, was weeping, and, after 45 minutes we were finished, and that was the end. That was actually overtime. It was after the workshop. She left. I mean, we didn't exchange contact information or anything, but that was a
Wow.
turning point in
Yes.
my kind of starting to deal on a deeper level with my own death, which of course is one of the
Beautiful.
most important spiritual
Yes.
practices
Yes,
that
it
there
is.
is.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Wow.
And I just want to throw in, I hope you don't mind, what that led to a number of things, but Ted became a wonderful hospice volunteer,
Wow. Wow.
particularly vigils, being there right at the end.
Yeah. Wow. Right? And to think, easily she could have been like, oh, I have
Yeah.
I have somewhere to be, right? I have something to do.
And you
Exactly.
too.
That's
I
right.
congratulate
That's
you.
right. It's brave to say
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
right? You could have said, oh, I'm
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I'm okay.
I'm
That's
okay.
right.
I'm
Yeah.
good. That's right. That's a great story. Like, yeah, it's all around. Always, right? Ways to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and really, just to complete the story, was I had the extraordinary opportunity to spend most of the last month of Thomas Keating's life at his bedside, and that the whole thing was what the feeling was. Everything in my life had prepared me to do that,
Wow.
starting with that
Wow.
particular.
What a gift.
Yes, extraordinary, life-changing.
Wow.
So it's interesting to think about the gifts that show up in our life. And they're not what we expect them to be a lot of the time.
That's right.
Most of the times.
That's right. And we don't always see them, right, for a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe perhaps not many of them until the very end. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yes,
Yeah.
they're always there. They're always there.
I was reading last night Joshua Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's a Jewish leading theologian, died a number of years ago. And his main term is radical astonishment.
Wow.
I love
I love
that.
that
That's
term,
fantastic.
I love
radical
that.
astonishment.
I love
That's
that.
great.
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I don't know if you. So I'm interested in your main terms. If I would say if I have a main term, it's connection. That if that would be the one thing that whether it's connection with, what's lifting us up, whether it's connection with our own inner selves or the divine or each other or that passion, or how about both of you? What would you say?
Well, mine right now is, influenced by what we're doing. It's spirit.
Yes.
And in my daily prayers, when I talk to myself about spirit, I say divine guidance, love, and energy.
Yes.
That I'm blessed. We are all blessed. That's how we exist, with love that's there. We may not be experiencing, but it's there.
It's there.
And we have energy, keeps us going, and we get guided.
Yes.
And the things we're talking about, how they happen, that's how they happen.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I would say for me, it's presence would be
Yeah.
the word that comes to mind, and that's both related to present moment awareness, but also to a kind of a abiding depth where there's a knowledge of connection with something much larger than our small
Yes.
selves. And that's really, I think, something that runs through all great spiritual traditions.
Yes.
And that it's really accessible everywhere. I mean, I teach mostly beginners meditation, and some of them will say, well, I've never meditated at all. This is brand new. And I will say, well, is there anything in your life that you really like doing? That when you're doing it, your mind kind of turns off and you're fully there, whether you're gardening or riding your bicycle or playing a musical instrument? I'll say, oh yeah, I love gardening, and yeah, it's wonderful. I'm just all my worries drop away. I'm just right there, and well. You're meditating.
There you are.
That's
right.
what it is. It's about just bringing a wholehearted presence
Yes.
to whatever is happening right now.
That's right. I bet they like that.
They do.
It makes them. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, what do you know? I do think there's a need. My experience has been at some point, and not that it can never evolve, because it certainly does, but to make the commitment to practice, though, I will say. And whatever it is, that it actually doesn't matter, but there's a need, and again, in my experience, for the depth of something, that we're only going to know the depth in the depth, and that's something we have to do.
Yes.
And so, for me, that's centering prayer and journaling, which is really sort of a two-way conversation with the divine. But those practices are my food every day, every morning, way early. So I don't know if you both agree the importance of having whatever that practice is or practices.
I think it's essential.
Yeah.
Absolutely essential. I do inside meditation, practice inside meditation, and centering prayer,
Yes.
and just one little yoga,
Yeah,
one more
yes,
tradition in the
yes,
middle, and
yes.
then the next.
That's great. Beautiful.
And I do my Jewish putting on prayer shawl, talis, and
Yeah.
tefillin, phylacteries,
Yeah.
and saying particular prayers. The interesting thing that I struggle with, and I think is really a fascinating thing, is doing a regular practice can easily fall into rote. So the challenge of tuning into what you're doing,
Yes.
where, I mean, there is value in doing it right because you're showing up
Yes.
to
That's
that
right.
connection to
That's
something
right.
greater.
That's right.
But how to keep it alive
Yeah.
fascinates me.
Yes. And I think trust the process. Not that you necessarily asked, but part of that is that, right, there will be dry times. And anyway, so yeah, and keep showing
Bet-
up
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
right? It's like any other commitment in our lives.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was the darkness, and that
Yes.
that really occurs on, I think, a couple of levels. I mean, that there's, for instance, grief,
Yes.
and that really needs to be worked through on an emotional, psychological level.
Yeah.
I think that, one of the things that I try to emphasize to people that I'm talking to who are in a kind of state of grief or despair is that we are part of something much larger,
Yes.
and that that what you're feeling has been experienced by millions of people
Yes. Yes.
throughout human history, and that right now you're bearing that
That's right.
for everybody.
That's right.
And that starts to move it toward the other darkness that yesterday afternoon, it was actually why I wasn't at your presentation, is that Cynthia Bourgeot was online live talking about my uncle, and that the emphasis was on his later homes, and
Yes.
big part of that was a dark night
Yes.
of the soul, of the spirit, that there is a darkness, an abyss that has to really be fallen through in order to really awaken
Yes.
to the ultimate reality of
Yes.
the connection of everything.
Yes. I'm sorry I missed that. I'll have to try to find a recording if it's available, but
I'll try to get that
Yes.
to you.
yes. And I think that whether it's St. Francis of Assisi or Thich Nhat Hanh or Richard Rohr, but they talk about this dying, right? This death
Yes.
of self. There's
Yes,
I
die
love
before you die.
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I love words, and one thing I love about Unitarian Universalism is that we play with words, because so many of them mean the same. It's like whatever resonates. Oh, does that catch? Okay, then use that, right? But right, death of the false self, dying before you die, dying of the ego, right? It's absolutely essential, and it can be terrifying, and it is part of it. It's part of it, Wow. Yes, it's essential. It's really essential. Can happen sometimes all at once, and other times it takes a long time. It's bit by bit. So yes, learning. I'm glad that she's talking about that and that he spoke of that and wrote of that. And because I think when we're there, if others don't talk about it or write about it we feel utterly alone. And yet it's so much the human condition. And then we get into things like whether it's ancestral trauma or even the pains of the world. I mean, sometimes it
Yes.
isn't even just ours
Yes.
that we're feeling. Yeah.
And so the need to lift the spirit
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. And that both and for me, right?
Yeah.
It's like to be in the abyss. And I think part of having practice is it's a place for that. And then for me, I put down my pen, I get off the chair, whatever, and I have my coffee, I go to work, I listen to another person, right? I mean, so it's all of it. And when there's space for all of it, it somehow finds its way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful.
Sure has. I could talk forever and ever. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been great to get to know you both better, too.
Anything you'd like to say in wrapping up?
Thank you thank you for offering this show. I'm looking forward to hearing from your other guests and participating in the breaks that we have at some time. And just, I hope people give it a chance, not just the show, but the spiritual part of who we all are. I hope people, give it a chance.
Beautifully spoken.
And would you like to say something about will be aired the third Wednesday in February,
Okay.
and then the third Wednesday in March is Steve.
Reverend Steve Notice will be joining us, the recently retired, well, a few months now, minister from the Methodist Church in Hampton, New Hampshire.
Wonderful.
And he brings a very interesting perspective, too. He's also someone who practices both Christian practices and insight meditation, Buddhist practice.
Right.
Excellent.
Right. So we hope you've had your spirit lifted in some way, and we hope you try out some of the things that have been suggested. And listen again, please. And watch again, please. Thank you.